Wat ben ik blij dat ik nog met de fiets naar de Horta mag komen. Blootstelling, daar gaat het om. Hoeveel adem je in van die vervuilde lucht? Niet zozeer wat zijn de emissies en wat is de wettelijke norm. Nee, de blootstelling. En die kleurtjes, die gaan we allemaal meedoen. Op het Astridplein staan mooie kleurtjes van groen, oranje en geel. Allemaal weg. Iets misleidend. Wat moeten we weten? Wat is onze persoonlijke blootstelling? En we staan voor een revolutie. Dat je met eenvoudige apparatuur die je gewoon op zak hebt en dan iets opspelt, kunt meten hoeveel vervuiling je inademt. Hoeveel vervuiling je inademt als je die wegneemt naar je werk en een andere weg. Als je fietst doorheen de Turnhoutse baan, als dat nog mag van de nieuwe politieke meerderheid, of als je via een andere weg gaat. Je kan het meten, je hebt feedback en daar gaat het om. De informatie over luchtvervuiling moet op een persoonlijk niveau gaan. Zodanig dat je het zelf in de hand hebt. Laat je wagen thuis, want dat is de hoogste concentratie. Die bus laat je gewoon passeren. Je gaat de volgende keer met de fiets of te voet naar de Horta. En tot de volgende Horta blijf je thuis in airconditioning en je komt niet buiten. Zo kun je het risico helemaal beperken. En aangezien je dan toch thuis bent, dan ga je naar de website gaan van Ademloos en stRaten-generaal en daar staan al deze presentaties op.
Veel blootstellingsonderzoek. En waarom? Dit is omdat dat ook een zeer interessant instrument kan zijn om mensen bewust te maken van de luchtkwaliteitsproblemen in zijn stad. Hij heeft onder andere in Londen een experiment gedaan, een aantal politici luchtkwaliteitsmetertjes opgespeld en er een paar dagen mee laten rondlopen en ineens gingen de geesten toch een beetje hyper blijkbaar. Dus ja, air quality, action and participation, ik geef het woord aan Barrat.
And thank you very much for staying. We're late in the day. I'm not going to be talking about NO2 in diesel vehicles. What I'm going to be talking about is engagement, basically. You are all engaged. You're sitting here at 9:30 on a Thursday evening listening to me. You are engaged. What I'm going to talk about is trying to reach those people who aren't in this room, the other people who need engaging. By engaging them, we can lead to action, greater participation. So I'm going to start on a happy note. This is something that our government produced, the House of Commons, in 2010, Environmental Audit Committee. So this is crossbench, Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat and Green parties all came together. And after looking at the air quality problem, they came to that conclusion. Poor air quality probably causes more mortality and morbidity than passive smoking, road traffic accidents or obesity if it receives little or no attention in the media and scant attention in Parliament, their Parliament. Why? Good question. I will not claim to answer that question, but I'll hope to give some of my own views and insights into it. Let's start here. Now, this is possibly part of the reason. This is the basic way that we're used to looking at current air quality information. This is across the whole of Europe, but I think you'll be familiar with this kind of system where we have little boxes, little buttons with colours on, and they show what current air quality levels are like in our town, if we're lucky enough to have a monitor there. This is incredibly important, very useful to authorities managing the legislative process. But this is not the way to engage the public. It's legislation-based. Health is in the background and the foundation of this, but the reporting methods are legislation-based. It's complex. You're not really capturing the true message just by looking at a little green or yellow box. Potentially misleading. I think we're all quite familiar with the fact that we look at one of these websites, we see it's got a green dot, and you think, no, that shouldn't be green. That should be yellow, that should be red, that's causing me harm, so it's potentially misleading. Most important, it's impersonal. This doesn't relate to people's lives. No one lives precisely where that monitoring site is, unless they're very unfortunate. It doesn't relate to how everyday people live, and themselves, their family, and their neighbourhood. So what I think we need to do is educate, engage and empower. And this is not unusual to air quality, this is something that we do with all public health issues. Now contrast your understanding, you engaged audience who know a lot about this subject, with other public health risks like water quality, smoking and obesity. You and the rest of society, most of them know how to reduce their risk of harm from these other public health issues. If you want to reduce your risk of harm from smoking, you don't smoke. If you want to risk your harm from poor water quality of your family, you don't let your toddler drink out of the dog bottle. If you want to reduce your risk of harm from obesity, you don't eat that second donut. These are all the things that are known and understood amongst the public. With air quality, even though the risks are equated with that, this is not fully understood. There's an issue of social justice here. This is a public issue. Therefore, the public is entitled to know how they reduce their risk. Then they can choose whether they alter their behaviour or not. If they don't know how to change that behaviour, then they're being penalised for something which is a lack of knowledge. So, the problem of air quality, to engage these people, needs to be explained on a personal level. They need to fully understand it themselves. And most of the current methods of information dissemination, such as the previous slide, aren't really achieving that. So let's look at the first potential barrier. Someone in the street might say, well, show me someone who's been killed by air pollution. Of course, air pollution doesn't kill you like a road accident does. Air pollution shortens your life, which is another way of saying it kills you very, very slowly. And what's an important thing to remember with air quality is it affects you throughout your life. We know that poor air quality causes low birth weight. So people are being penalised right from the start of their life. We know that air quality causes children's lungs to develop more slowly and less. And once they're less developed in a younger life, you're stuck with those lungs, those smaller lungs, for the rest of your life. As we get older, there's an increased risk from air pollution of chronic disease. So you may develop illnesses early in life, which then shorten your life later in life. There's also a risk of exacerbation, so acute health attacks. And these accumulate over your lifespan. And then there is risk from any point, here onwards, of this air pollution harm ending your life. So all of these things are cumulative, they affect us all, and they affect us throughout our lives. Barrier number 2, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't avoid air pollution, so I don't think about it. i.e., it's not my problem. So, to avoid the head in the sand, we want to try and make it personal. However, once the public have been convinced that air pollution poses a risk to their own and their family's health, they need to be given hope or they will disengage. This is a conclusion from a number of public focus groups that were looking at the issue of air pollution. It was carried out last year and due to be published this year. And this is the kind of climate change effect that if you say the world is going to end, people, it's so horrific that people throw their hands in their air and say, okay, I don't want to think about that, and stick their head back in the sand again. So we need to give them options, we need to engage them. And there are increasingly methods to be able to do this, to make it personal, which were not previously scientifically possible, so they were difficult to bring into the public domain. And by doing this, making it personal, but avoidable, we can overcome this second barrier. So I'm going to give you a few examples, and these are, you may choose to call it citizen science examples. I choose to use the words community-led research. The difference being that these are projects where communities have come to us with air quality concerns. We've given them advice, we've given them equipment, we've helped them interpret those results. essentially these are their projects. And then we hope, we feel, that by them being in control of these experiments, they will engage with the results and more likely to change their behaviour, both individually and within their communities. So the first one I'm going to talk about, before I move on, a very brief word for a short time about the kind of monitoring equipment we're using. Yes. So in each of these examples, this is the kind of equipment we've been using. These are small personal air pollution sensors. And these are quite extensively used to very great effect in Belgium as well. There's some great research going on into black carbon with these instruments. It allows you to measure personal exposure to air pollution with some degree of accuracy. This is a very rapidly developing field, as I'm sure you're aware and will have read about cheap air pollution sensors. But a word of caution, there's a lot of benefit of these instruments, but there's also a lot of harm that can be done with them. They need to be used very carefully, interpreted very carefully. So I said the first one is the concept of making air pollution visible. And this was a community project in southeast London. And within this community, there was concern about air pollution, but they didn't really grasp the concept very clearly amongst it. It wasn't well disseminated. So we gave 7 of these personal monitors to members of that community with different lives. Toddler, school pupil, office worker, home worker, cycle courier, and ambulance driver. And they all monitored for the same 24-hour period. The idea was to compare the lifestyle and the exposure. Now, would anyone like to guess who out of those 7 people had the lowest exposure to air pollution over that 24-hour period? It was
homework.
Not the home worker, who spent too long in the cycle. Not the cycle courier. Okay.
Can't hear it.
Okay. Is that better? Yeah.
It's better?
Pensioner.
Is that better? Yeah, that's going to be better. Okay, Martin. Good move on. Yeah. The office worker. Now, the office worker worked in central London. In theory, the most polluted place of any of these people spend their day. And the highest?
Total.
Toddler. He was a pessimist in the It's the ambulance driver. And that's, the exposure of the ambulance driver was 2.5 times higher than the office worker. So that immediately shows that there is a contrast. 2.5 times higher is much greater contrast that you would get from the monitoring results across Antwerp. Okay. So let's look at the time series of the day of the nursery toddler. And this really jumps out. So this is a small child in a pushchair. He gets pushed to the nursery in the morning and exposed on the way to levels of, this is black carbon, air pollution levels, nearly 20 times higher than when at home. So this is quite clearly the journey. And it's immediately recognisable to anyone looking at this that that exposure during that journey is so much higher than the rest of the day. Spent the day in the nursery in central London and then travelled home. And again, you've got these highest peaks. And then you'll notice at home, which is in inner London rather than central London, the levels were lower, about half the height that they were during the nursery day. And then if you look at the office work, you'll start to see why. Travel, big peaks in the travel. But the office was mechanically ventilated, even though it was in central London. It had a very efficient air conditioning system which filtered out the air pollution from outside. So during the day, it was exposed to virtually no air pollution at all. We could tell him exactly to the minute when he left that office to go out for his lunch break. We could tell his boss how long he spent on that lunch break. And we know what time he knocked off in the evening. I suspect he may have worked extra long that day, just so he knew we were watching him. But notice in this case, in his home in suburban London, pollution levels were higher than in his office in central London. So I think you can all engage, you can all understand this information, you can comprehend the air pollution, you can almost see it, and you can relate your days to these days. And you can plot them on a map as well, so it's not just temporal variation, it's spatial. And this is a school kid. So there's a couple of really interesting things here. One, in the morning, he took the bus from the north up there, to school. And he spent the day at school and then he walked back home again. And you can see immediately red dots, bad, yellow dots, good. Pollution exposure on the bus is much higher than walking along the back roads. But importantly, pollution levels in his school were a lot lower than in his home, because his home was right next to the A2, which is a major trunk road. So you can start to explore where people are and what they're doing. So we've made it visible. Now we've got to provide some kind of hope, some choice to demonstrate you can do things. And this is an experiment we did with ITV News. This is the ITV News weatherman. And he was a keen cyclist, and he'd heard about this problem. He wanted to know what he could do about it. So we set up an experiment where we used one of our apps which shows high and low air pollution routes. He cycled the high air pollution route, I cycled the low air pollution route. And we both carried monitors. The bottom line, because I'm moving quickly, is that my exposure on the low air pollution route was 75% lower than his exposure on the high air pollution route. But importantly, we both, and this is not TV trickery, we both arrived at his ITM offices at exactly the same time. So it was no longer, it didn't take any more time. I was safer on that journey. My exposure was lower. It was less noise, it was more pleasant. There's no reason why that route shouldn't be taken by everyone else. Just put that 75% in contrast. Think about what's happened in the last 10 years, 20 years. 10 years, we managed to only reduce it by 20%. So that's 2. 3, raising awareness. So again, this was a project proposed by a residents' association who was worried about school kids walking to school along busy roads. So it's to raise awareness of the school children and show that there was an option, and show the parents the pollution that they were being exposed to. So they were engaged in class, they drew maps of where they lived, how they got to school, they played with the pollutant monitors, they didn't break any of them, and then they carried them home. So 5 at a time, each day over a few weeks, they carried them home monitoring air pollution. The next morning they brought them back in again. And we started to map the pollution exposure of the school kids on these routes, and you can see the different exposure levels. Now school kids are much more fickle than ITN weathermen. The routes they choose to and from school are very complicated social examinations to do with sweet shops, parks, where mates live, etc., etc. But it's raising awareness, and the kids could almost see air pollution. So one of the main points here is we can go back into that school after we've engaged with them, after we've shown them these routes, and see in a few months' time whether any of those school kids have changed their behaviour. So you start to be able to gather evidence of behavioural change. So finally, informing and improving air quality. So it's not just about awareness, it's about trying to improve air quality at the same time. I think it's fair to say when I started my academic career in atmospheric science, I had no idea that I would share the screen with a fashion icon. But Vivienne Westwood took part in this trial. She's as mad as a balloon, but she really strongly believes in climate change and air quality issues. So she was part of this film that we created. And the idea here is to look at the different modes of transport. So a similar kind of experiment, the same route, the same day, people travelling in different modes of transport. In fact, what we did, we chose the same route, those modes, but also a low and high pollution route. And I encourage you to watch that video, because it's very well made by some professional filmmakers, and it's really quite engaging and easy to understand. Basically, what it found was, what we hoped, the person in the car was sitting right in the middle of that pollution. The exhaust pipe of the vehicle in front was right in front, coming into the vents of the vehicle. So there were many, many times higher exposure within that car. The bus was slightly better, but still much higher than the other mode of transport. The bicycles, even though they were cycling that route, the same route to that car, they were exposed to much lower pollution. They were continuously ventilating the air that they breathed as they cycled along. Because this is central London, or inner London, the journey was much quicker by bike anyway, but they were exposed at lower pollution levels. And then the bottom 2 there are this low air pollution route. So choosing your route, choosing your mode of transport. But importantly, there's another message here that not only does cycling improve your health through physical activity, not only does it improve the environment by not creating the emissions, but you're actually exposed, generally speaking, to less air pollution as you cycle. So coming to an end, I talked about this concept of engaging and empowering and educating the public, engaging those who aren't already engaged, and showing them air pollution, showing that they can change their behaviour in ways that will reduce their exposure to air pollution. In changing this behaviour and reducing their exposure, they can improve their individual health. And at the end of the day, this is what really affects people. They know that they, as an individual, or as their family, they can protect themselves or their family. So there's another important point. There's also evidence that by engaging and empowering and educating, you change behaviour. But as you change behaviour of exposure, you also change behaviour of creating that pollution. You accept it. You increase the acceptability of controls on this air pollution because people can understand it. They will accept policies that then affect it. That in turn improves air quality and then it improves public health across the community. One side, this side, the yellow side about improving individual health cannot act on its own because in itself it does not improve air quality. You need the green side. There is evidence that these two can be linked together. Okay. So finally, what about the Environmental Audit Committee? These MPs who made this statement in 2010. 4 years later, they revisited the issue of air quality. And they still felt there was much more to be done, but they understood by now that it was quite a difficult concept, and they knew about the legislation and so on, but they really didn't understand. So we offered to conduct the same kind of experiment with the MPs. And these are 3 MPs, members of Parliament for Southampton, Stoke-on-Trent and Hendon, Labour and Conservative. And they carried the pollution monitor for a week around their constituency, talking to constituents. We've got quotes from the MPs about their changing their own behaviour. They now can see air pollution, they understand it much more. Since these 5 MPs did it, we've had requests from other MPs to do it. They want to take it to their constituency. We had a request from the shadow Minister of Environment to carry one of these monitors. And you know that you're onto something which is pretty engaging when the MPs themselves come to you and ask to do an experiment on it. Thank you.